Hello, John Dursick here with the Ohio Department of Transportation in the Office of CAD Mapping Services, and this video is going to go over the Plan Notes VBA. This VBA can be used to help set up your general note sheets and place standard notes or user-defined notes. This VBA has been around for a while, and I basically went through and gave it a facelift. I moved some things around and added a couple features which I think you guys will like. So, to launch this application, you're going to want MicroStation open with the ODOT CAD standards loaded. And under the ODOT tab, there's a plan preparation, and then there's plan notes. And so we're going to click that to launch this application. And now for those of you who have used this in the past, you'll instantly notice that there is some new stuff and stuff has been moved around. So the first thing I've added is this list box right here. And so this list box will get populated with all of the standard note files when it's launched. So before you've had to use the search button and navigate to the file and open it, and then anytime you want to open a different one, you had to do the same thing. And this makes it easier because now you can just select all the files. And so these note files, for those of you who maybe are new to this application, all of the ODOT standard notes are in a .not file. It's basically a text file that's set up for this program to read, and they are located in the standards. So inside the ODOT CAD folder, standards, ODOT notes, and here are all the standard note files. So all of these are loaded into that list box. Now you can also have office-specific notes, and so it will also preload those as well. And so as long as they are saved in the ODOT CAD folder inside the local folder, you just need to create a notes folder inside that local folder and put your files in there. And then when this application is launched, it will actually look at this location as well and will load it into this list box. So delete that, we don't need that. So now, if you have other notes for some reason that aren't at those two locations, you can use this search button, and it'll bring up a file browser, and you can select a NOT file, and you can hit open, and it will add it to this list, as long as it has not already been loaded in this list. This list box also supports scroll wheel functionality, as well as you can drag and drop your note files in here. So if I go back to those notes, I could drag and drop one in, but since it's already been preloaded, it's telling me it's already been added to the list, so it's not going to add it again. So that's basic operation for how you can get to the note files. So before we go over the notes themselves, I want to go over a couple different buttons. We'll go over the Show Editor button in a minute, and same thing with the View Designer note. I want to go over the Place Cell button. So this was there in the previous version, but I've added two checkboxes so you can define what you want to place. So you can place the Gen Note cell and or the 4-column outline. So with both of them checked on, if I hit the Place Cell button, you'll see that I will get the general notes border as well as the 4-column outline. And now when I place this, it does not care what drawing scale you have set. It will force it to place at a 1:1 scale. And that is because you typically are going to have your general notes at that scale. There's no need to have it at another scale. So you can, if you don't want the 4-column outline, you can check that off and you only get the cell, or vice versa. And if you don't have anything checked, the button grayed out because there's nothing to place. So I'm going to place that just by data pointing, and I'll reset to cancel out of that command. So now there's a Place Note button, which you'll notice is grayed out. Now it's not going to be enabled until I actually select a note, which we'll get to here in a second. This question mark will open up a PDF that goes through all of the documentation about this VBA. I do want to mention that there is a tips and cautions section that I highly recommend reading to make sure that you understand exactly how this application is working and so that you get the desired results. So give that a look once you're done watching this. So now, when I select one of the note files that have been loaded into this list box, the program will read that note file and will populate this list box with all the notes it found inside that file. And so there's note ID and then there's a title for that note. Now, this list box also supports scroll wheel functionality, as you can see, where it didn't in the past. So now, if I want to place a note, I have to select the note so it knows what to place. And the same thing for the View Designer note. So the View Designer note is grayed out until you select a note that contains a designer note. So if I select this, it contains a designer note, so I can now click this button and it'll open up this dialog and it'll be populated with the designer note for that selected note. So I'll move on from that because that's pretty simple, easy to understand. So now I can place a note, and so when I place a note, these note files have been set up so that it will fit in our standard column width. So as you can see here, it's fitting within the column width. Now to place it, if you guys haven't done this before, you can use this 4-column outline to assist in the placement of your notes. So you can just tentative snap close on this horizontal line and it'll snap you to that intersection point. And then I can just write data point to accept that. And then it just drew those and replace those elements. And then I can reset to cancel out of that. So now you'll notice that these texts are placed as text elements, not text node. So each line is its own element. And it is placed at the appropriate row height. So you notice this is following our standard row height. So each line basically starts. And so that's our standard. It's a 2.8 is our standard row height, or 0.28, sorry. So I mentioned that this cell is forced to place at a 1 scale. But the text will take into account your annotation scale. So if you did have like 1 to 20 set, it would scale up this text. So that's something to note. There's really you should be on a 1-to-1 scale when you're doing your notes. But if for some reason you did, it placed this cell at a 1 scale. So when you go to place your text, it's not going to look right. It's going to look too large. So keep that in mind. So now to go over the more of the advanced functions of this application is with the Show Editor button. So when I select this, the dialog will resize to show the editor. So you'll notice it switches to Hide Editor. So if I wanted to hide it again, I could just click that button again. So now you'll notice that the note editor has a text box, and this text box gets populated with the selected note. So as I select a different note, the text box gets populated with that note. So now there are some more advanced functions with this, but first I'm going to go over the bold title checkbox. So if you notice when I place this, the first line actually has a line weight of 2. If I open up the element selection, we can see that it has a weight of 2, whereas all the other ones have a weight of 1. And so that's what checking the bold title text box will do. If you did not want that title to be bolded, then uncheck it, and when you place it, it won't be placed at a line weight of 2. Now, there are some notes that have the title line span multiple lines, like this one. It goes to 2 lines. So the way this program figures out how many lines to bold is at the time the note is selected. So when this note was selected, it figured out how many lines to bold based off of how many lines the title was. So that's at the time that you select the note. So if you go and change it afterwards, for some reason, it's not going to get that third line. So this is why I've added this override number of title lines to bold. So if you're creating your own note from scratch, then it does not know how many title lines to bold. And so you can use this by checking it on and telling it how many lines to bold. So with this checked on, it will then bold the number of lines that you type in here. So I type in 3, so if I place it, it would bold the first 3 lines. So that's more intended to use for if you're creating your own note from scratch. So that's the bold title. So now there are some justification options. So up here there's a block justify, there's a left justify, and you also notice there's a block placement. And you're probably wondering, what's the difference between these two? And there is a difference. They do perform different functions, and I'll go through that. But these buttons are really taking into account this setting right here. So let's pull down where it says 4 column. I can switch that to user defined, and you'll notice that this text box is now editable. So this text box is the column width. So if you leave it on 4 column, it'll be grayed out, and that's the standard column width of 6.44. So if you're using the standard 4 column outline, then you can leave it on that and you'll be good. Now if you change it to user defined, you can define your own column width, and then these buttons will take into account that column width. So to go over the block placement checkbox, if we notice when I look at this note, it's not block justified. So, this did not go all the way to the end of that column. This is going a little past it. And so the block placement will stretch or shrink each line of text in an attempt to make it go exactly the column width. Now there are tolerances built into that, and so you can find those tolerances in the settings button up here. So when I click that, I get this settings dialog, and there's a max stretch value, a max shrink value, and a tab spaces value. So what this is saying is only stretch my line up to 1.06 and only shrink up to 0.94. And so the reason why there's tolerances is once it starts stretching or shrinking outside those values, the text starts to become unreadable because it's stretched out or shrink too much. And so you can change these values as desired, but I would caution on how much higher you would make them because you could get unreadable text. And the tab spaces is there because VBA has a little trouble with the tab character. And so this is an attempt to get more consistent results. But it's really, I guess, our suggestion is you avoid using tabs in this editor. But you can still use it if you want, but you might not always get the desired result. So this is basically saying here's how many spaces to use for a tab. I won't dwell on that. So coming back here, if I place this note with the block placement checked off, and I snap, and then I'll place it with it checked on so you guys can see what it's doing, and I'll place it next to it. Up here. So now you can see that, what was here was stretched. These 2 lines were shrinked a little bit. Setting down here. Well, those are outside the tolerances. So you can see where it gets outside the tolerance, it won't actually stretch it or shrink it. And so that's what the block placement is doing. It's stretching or shrinking, and it's going to stretch or shrink to the value set here. So if you had a user-defined column width, it would use that value. So that is the block placement. So now moving over to the justification buttons. These buttons are really intended to be used with a user-defined note or creating one from scratch, because these notes have been set up already to have the appropriate line breaks, so there's no real need to use the justify buttons. So say I was typing in a note from scratch, and I'm just going to throw a bunch of crap in. So I just typed a bunch of stuff. If I hit the place note, it's all on one line. It's all on one line because there's no line breaks. And so that's what the justification buttons will do. And so the left justify will basically remove any line breaks that were there and then re-add them, again looking at what your column width value is set at to know where to add these line breaks. And so it will only basically format what you have selected. So if I only select these two lines and I hit the justify button, it's only going to justify what I have selected. So I'll select all of that, and I'll hit the left justify button. I'm going to turn off block placement for now. So now you see that I have the line breaks and it's within my column width that I set. So the block justify does one more step. It adds those line breaks, but it will also try to pad each line with spaces in an attempt to make the column width go exactly to your column width. So it's different from the block placement. As the block placement stretches or shrinks, this block justify is going to add extra spaces in an attempt to get close to the column width. So if I block justify now and I hit place, you can now see I have some extra spaces in here in it to make it. Now it's not going to be exact because the font, all the characters are not an equal width, so it's impossible to get it exact. So if you really want to get exact, you could toggle on the block placement button and it will shrink or stretch to get you exact. So that's the difference between those two buttons and how you should use them. So now a little bit more about the note editors. I don't think I mentioned it yet, but it is not a WYSIWYG. It's not what you see is what you get. As you saw when I initially typed in stuff, it shows in the dialog going to another line, but when I actually place it, it's not. And so that's what that tips and tricks section will help go through some of that stuff and make sure you better understand how this note editor is working. But just keep that in mind, that just because you see it looking one way in the editor does not mean that's the way it's going to be placed. So a little more about the note editor. If I right click inside of it, I get this right click menu for cut, copy, paste, select all, clear selection, and delete all. So like if I select delete all, it'll clear out my note editor. So I'm not going to go through all those. They're pretty simple, self-explanatory. But those are available to you, just as you can use Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste. So one of the things that the old application was lacking was the ability to read notes that you've already placed back into the note editor. And so that's what this read selected elements button is that I've added. So in the past, if you wanted to edit, you could highlight, you could copy it, and you could paste it just like that. But if you had spaces like this right here, it would not put that space in. As well as if you moved the elements around, like say you edited the note and you brought this down and you made a new text element there. When you read this back in by copying and pasting, it's going to grab this line, then this line, then this line, and then this line. It'll grab it in the order that it was plotted. And so those were two limitations that the old version had, and those limitations are answered with this read selected elements button. And so what the read selected elements button will do is you basically will highlight your text. So say I want to bring all this, and let me make sure I grab everything. Say I want to bring that in, I'll highlight it, and then I'll hit the read selected buttons. And what it will do is it will find all the text elements, and even if you had text node elements, it will also read those as well. And it will first do a sort in the Y direction to make sure that it's brought into no editor in the right order. Now, so with that, it means you cannot highlight across columns because your Y values, these would be sorted in line with these. So you do have to read it in one column at a time, which I don't think is so bad. So after it does that sort, it then goes through and sees what the spacing is between each line, and then that's how it will figure out if it should add in these spaces or not. So if I hit the read selected, well, before I hit that, there are two options in checkboxes. So the first one is clear editor before placing read text. And so if I check that, if I had anything in my no editor, it would clear it out and then put in the selected text. As well as there's a delete selected elements after read. So what that will do will, after I hit the read selected elements button, it will delete the highlighted text elements because you're ultimately going to replace it anyways, so you probably would want to delete it. So I'll leave that on. I'll leave those checked off for now. So when I hit the read selected, you see it added that in, and there are the spaces, which is pretty cool, I think. A couple more things about this application. This place note button, if you have nothing selected, it will place the whole note or all the text in the text box. If you have something highlighted, then when I hit the place note, it will only place what you have highlighted. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, I recommend taking a look at this PDF. If you guys have questions or comments about this or suggestions, please let me know. But until next time.